to the dark world of scary stories. A place where every sound is a premonition of the unknown, and every shadow is a step into another dimension. If you're ready to open the door to the scariest secrets, subscribe to the channel and don't forget to hit the bell, because the scariest is yet to come. Turn on the light and let's begin. The Loch Ness Monster. The mist began to fill Loch Ness, enveloping the water in its cold embrace. A heavy atmosphere of uncertainty hung in the air, and even the old waves crashing against the stones seemed less familiar. Under the cover of night, in the depths of this dark and cold body of water, something terrifying lives, long hiding from human eyes. In a small Scottish town near the lake, no one dared to enter the water after sunset. Everyone knew the stories about the monster that hides beneath the surface. But even among the locals, there was no one who had ever seen it with their own eyes. Legends lived in every family, and even those who laughed at the tales couldn't deny that something extraordinary was, in fact, here. In the summer of 1972, a group of young American tourists set out to the south of Scotland to explore the place that had become a symbol of a global mystery. James, Daisy, Tom, and Sarah were all familiar with the legends of the Loch Ness Monster. They were convinced it was just a myth, a product of people's overactive imaginations. However, their attitude quickly changed. One day, they decided to take a boat and sail across the lake. The mist had just lifted from the water, leaving a thin veil of cold air around them. The sky grew overcast, and the day gradually turned to night. James, who was always the boldest, steered the boat further into the lake, where, according to locals, one could see strange shapes beneath the surface. "We should be prepared for anything," he said with a smile, though he felt uneasy. But as the boat drifted further from the shore, the darkness seemed heavier. How many times had they heard about the Loch Ness Monster? But now, here, in the middle of the lake, everything felt different. A few minutes earlier, Daisy had noticed strange ripples in the water but dismissed them as just a fishing boat. But as they got closer to that spot, everything felt more ominous. The water began to move unexpectedly, and strange bubbles appeared on the surface with no explanation. Sarah looked at it in fear, her heart racing as if it knew this was no illusion. "Tom, what is that?" she said, staring at the lake's waters. Tom, the skeptic among them, pressed his lips together and didn't answer. Suddenly, the boat lurched to the side, as if some great force bent it in one direction, causing panic. In that moment, when they all lost their balance and tried not to fall into the water, something large and dark emerged from the depths of the lake. Its enormous form revealed itself from the abyss like a terrifying ghost. A giant wave engulfed the boat, and in the faint light piercing through the mist, they saw huge eyes staring at them from the deep. It's it," James said, unable to believe his eyes. He felt his blood freeze as the massive shadow slowly slid back under the water, leaving unsettling waves in its wake. "Let's go back," Daisy cried. Without a second thought, they all started rowing, trying to return to the shore, but the lake wasn't so easy. Suddenly, the waters began to swallow their boat, and it slowly started sinking. Powerful waves rolled over them, throwing them off balance. None of them knew how long they fought against the water. Their legs wouldn't obey, and with each stroke, the waves grew stronger. And then they saw it again. From the depths of the dark water rose a long neck with deep cuts and soft, leathery protrusions. It was the Loch Ness Monster, standing before them in full size. Its dimensions surpassed all their imaginings, and it bore signs of ancient battles, as if it were a creature that had lived in the lake for thousands of years. From the very darkness, they heard a terrible howl. It wasn't like any sound they had ever heard before, a sound that resembled the deadly cruelty of time. Desperately trying to save themselves, they saw the monster moving toward the boat. With each step, the waters parted, and its large head disappeared back into the darkness. It was not something they could simply forget. The creature didn't follow them. It merely left them in that same state of anxiety and despair. They returned to the shore, one by one, in silence. They no longer laughed at the legends. They no longer questioned whether something unexplainable existed. They, like everyone who had ever looked into the depths of Loch Ness, felt that the strange monster held its power over this place. And from that time on, they never shared their story with others, silently observing each subsequent ripple in the waters of the lake. Because they knew the creature didn't want to be found. It was simply a part of a world where the unexplainable hides in the shadows. A year had passed since that terrifying incident on Loch Ness. James, Daisy, Tom, and Sarah, although they had tried to return to their normal lives, still couldn't forget what they had seen. Each of them experienced the event in their own way. Tom, of course, refused to believe that it had been a real monster. He insisted that they had probably seen some unknown fish or another aquatic object. But even his boldest theories couldn't explain the terror they had all felt. Daisy was convinced that the monster was real, and she even tried to study the history of Loch Ness, searching for evidence to support her beliefs. She read about the legends of Nessie, as the locals called her, about ancient tribes who believed in the creature, and even about how fragments of ancient ships contained frightening drawings of the monster. But she also realized that there were many others who were simply trying to profit from the mystery. But one morning, a year after the incident, something happened that made them look at the situation in a new light. James received a letter. It was plain, with no formal address or signature. The letter came from the heart of Scotland, from a village near Loch Ness. "I know what you saw. If you want to know more, come back to the lake. I will show you what we all fear to see." The letter unsettled them. What was this? Who could have sent it? What did they want to show? Gathering together, they decided to return to Scotland. And so, they stood once again on the same shore of Loch Ness, feeling the cold breath of the lake. And once again, that eerie mist hung in the air, hiding an unseen threat. This time, they went to an old local library that stood away from the main village. It was hidden among tall trees, as if nature itself was trying to conceal it from human eyes. They were greeted by an elderly librarian, who stared at them for a long time, silently assessing. "You've returned," he said when they entered the library. "I thought you wouldn't come back. You've already seen what you needed to see, haven't you?" "What do you mean?" asked James, although he suspected that the old librarian knew far more than he was willing to reveal. "Nessie," he replied with a mysterious expression on his face. "She's not simple. And if you truly want to know more, you need to go deeper. Remember, what you seek may not be what it seems. And if you uncover it, you will never return to who you were." These words unsettled them, but they kept listening. The librarian led them to a secret section where ancient manuscripts were stored. One of them, a large black tome that almost had no binding, caught Daisy's attention. She began to carefully flip through the pages. It was the story of ancient times when Loch Ness was a sanctuary for local tribes who worshipped the monster. The story spoke of numerous sacrifices, of people who vanished without a trace, allegedly becoming part of what lived under the water. But the most terrifying thing was that some of the drawings in these manuscripts resembled what they had seen on the lake a year ago. "This isn't just a legend," Daisy whispered. "It's all true." At that moment, as they studied the ancient records, the librarian quietly appeared beside them. It seemed he had been waiting for this moment. "You want to know what the Loch Ness monster is?" he asked, his voice becoming soft and ominous. "It doesn't just exist. It's an ancient creature, cursed. It emerged from the depths of this lake, and those who tried to unravel its secret often became part of this curse. Leaving this place is the only way to save your soul." Daisy, who was the least inclined to believe in such supernatural explanations, felt cold sweat on her brow. She knew that the librarian was not lying. The creature was real, and it had a purpose that humans could not understand. Meanwhile, James and Sarah decided to venture out on a boat, to try once more to find traces of the monster after all the stories. They set out onto the dark lake, though each of them felt a deep inner fear. They sailed into the very depths of the lake, and then it happened again. At first, small waves, then a large shadow that once again emerged from beneath the water. And suddenly, the water began to bubble and stir as if a giant creature was waking from the depths. They saw it, a huge, monstrous head, giant eyes staring directly at them. The water pulled at the boat, and James and Sarah barely managed to stay on the surface as the monster began to glide beneath the water, as though it were present in their very thoughts. Daisy, standing on the shore, saw it from a distance. And then she understood everything. The monster wasn't just hiding. It was waiting. It was waiting for the moment when there would be no more doubt, neither in the people nor in their hearts. Daisy knew that now they could not leave this place. The mystery of the Loch Ness monster was intertwined with their fate, and now they had to go further. Whatever awaited them in the darkness of the lake, they had no choice but to unravel this terrible secret. Daisy stood on the shore of Loch Ness, staring at the churning waters. Her heart raced, and she felt that something incredibly important and terrifying was happening in the lake. The creature they had seen was not just a myth or part of legends. It was a living, breathing entity that had long been a part of this place, a part of its history. Daisy turned to the old librarian, who had quietly approached her, carefully observing what was happening. His eyes were calm, but there was a deep sadness in them, as if he knew that what was coming next was inevitable. "You saw it, didn't you?" he asked. "You understand that the monster is not just hiding under the water? It's already part of this lake, part of everything that happens here. And you'll have to accept that. You can't leave without dealing with what's happened." Daisy nervously nodded, but couldn't respond. The words were foggy in her mind. All those legends about curses, about ancient forces hidden in the depths that wanted to take souls. She couldn't believe it, but what she, James, and Sarah had experienced was too real to deny. Suddenly, she heard a noise on the water. Tom was returning in the boat, with a face that didn't promise anything good. With him was James, holding an ancient map. "This is a map," James said as they got closer. "And it's not just an old plan of the lake. It's a guide to a place where we need to go." "What's this place?" Daisy asked. "Down there, beneath the water. The place where we must search for the answer," James replied, his voice sounding ominous. Sarah was with them as well. Her face was pale, and it was clear how deeply she was shaken. She was still in shock from what had happened on the lake and couldn't even speak. Everyone was trying to figure out what they should do next. Only Daisy felt that this was not just a coincidence. It was like a call to something much bigger. The librarian watched them, as if waiting for them to make a choice. But there was no other option. They all knew they had to continue the investigation, even though they understood it could be very dangerous. They set off for the place marked on the map. The water looked calm, but in the middle of the lake, nothing could be seen except a misty veil. They sailed toward the deep part, to the spot where the map indicated the Loch Ness monster might be. As soon as the boat reached this part of the lake, the water began to churn again, and a huge wave shifted their boat sideways. James lost his balance, and they all fell into the water. Panic took over, and only with Tom's help, who got everyone together, did they manage to get back to the surface. And then, just like a year ago, they saw it. It was a huge shape beneath the water, moving with incredible speed. A massive tail that tore through the waves, and a dark mass that seemed unnatural. "It sees us," Sarah whispered as she watched the terrifying creature drawing closer to them. But this time was different. The monster didn't attack them. It didn't move with the same ferocity as before. It was silent, calm. It seemed to be observing them, studying them. And again, just like that day, they felt that time was running out. And it wasn't just their anxiety. They all began to realize that this moment was not a coincidence. It was part of the same curse they had tried to avoid, but it had caught up with them. They could not leave this place without an answer. And the only thing they knew for sure was this. The Loch Ness monster didn't just exist, it was part of this land, part of its history, and they were now part of its curse. They stared at the waters, and each of them understood. Their encounter with the monster was not a coincidence. They had seen it again, and now they couldn't simply run away. They had become part of this cycle, this terror, and now they had to make a choice. To continue seeking the answer, or leave this place forever. But were they ready to understand what the Loch Ness monster truly symbolized? They had to find that out, and only then could they leave this cursed place. Would this be their final decision, or perhaps the next generation would continue their search, unaware that they had become part of the same endless circle that never gives an answer? Time seemed insignificant, yet at the same time, it was everything. They floated in that boat, surrounded by the waters of Loch Ness, feeling that their presence there was something much deeper than just a desire to unravel a mystery. The water around them churned as the large body of the monster moved beneath the surface. This was not just a creature, it was an enemy, mysterious and elusive, living in the depths. "We need to figure out why it's not attacking us," James said quietly, watching the massive outline beneath the water. His hands still trembled from the shock of what had happened. He couldn't understand why the monster wasn't attacking them, even though its presence was undoubtedly threatening. "Maybe we're somehow connected to it," Daisy said, her voice filled with anxiety. "Maybe it's not just fear. Maybe it's waiting for something. Maybe it's looking for answers just like we are." Sarah stared at the water, feeling its coldness seep into her very soul. She didn't know how to fully comprehend this creature, but her intuition told her they were on the brink of uncovering a great secret that couldn't be revealed all at once. And then it happened. From the depths, a large wave rose, engulfing the boat. They were all thrown into the cold water, scattered in different directions. James tried to grab an oar, but it slipped from his hands. They fought for every breath, trying to rise to the surface. The water was unnaturally cold, even for such a deep lake, and on the surface, it looked like dark oil. Tom, who had remained calm, suddenly shouted when his gaze fell upon the many rusty wrecks protruding from the water. They were remnants of ancient ships that had never sunk, seemingly remaining in a sleep at the bottom. They managed to reach the shore, exhausted, wet, but alive. But it was then that the silence fell upon them, so deep and unsettling that their hearts froze. From the water, it was not the monster that emerged, but a voice, low, deep, as if it came from the very depths of the lake. "Do you want to know more? Do you want to understand?" The voice echoed from the water. It was not just sound, it was an ancient language that sent a chilling cold through their souls. "This is not a place for your search. You came here, and this will be your final path." Daisy felt the ground beneath her feet grow colder. She couldn't breathe. They had found the boundary that separated them from the truth. And this truth was not what they expected. It wasn't just a monster, or just a legend. It was part of something worse, something not of this world. And just at the moment when it seemed they were trapped, they heard the librarian's voice. "You will still come to me. I know this will stop you, but you will never leave this place. This is not just a story, it is a curse." Daisy tried to gather all her strength. She realized that their return wasn't just out of a desire to know the truth. It was to stop what should never have been uncovered. They had broken the rules, and now they were part of what was hidden beneath the waters of this ancient lake. "You're right," Daisy said, her voice breaking with fear. "We can't run from this anymore." And everything fell into place. They couldn't leave this place because it had already become a part of them. They all felt something dark and heavy looming over them. The monster, which had once been a terrifying legend, had become their fate. This was the beginning of the end for them. The time they spent searching for answers was only the beginning of what lay ahead. They could not leave this place because what they had uncovered had become part of themselves. And the Loch Ness monster watched them from the dark waters, its eyes reflecting all their desperate struggles. They had learned more than they should have, and this was no longer just about research. It was about loss and irreversible absorption. They had returned to that place where there was no road back. They sat on the shore of Loch Ness, frozen by the realization of what had happened. The fog that enveloped the lake had grown thicker, almost physically tangible, and it seemed that everything around them was becoming part of this cursed place. Each of them knew that they could not leave this place as they would any other. They were already part of it, part of a story without an end. "We can't just leave," Daisy said, her voice sounding torn and miserable. "This is more than we could have imagined. It's more than just a monster. It's part of something much bigger." Tom looked at her, his face showing no emotion, but his eyes were full of despair. "We've already broken all the rules," he said. "There's no way back. The Loch Ness monster doesn't just exist. It is this place. The water that flows here is part of this creature. And if we don't find a way to finish what we've started, we'll remain here forever." Sarah, who had been silent the whole time, suddenly lifted her head and looked at James. "But how can we finish this?" Her voice was weak but penetrating. "How can we sever what has already become part of us?" James looked tired, but also resolute. He knew there was no easy solution. However, recalling the dark legends, the deciphered ancient manuscripts, and what he had seen with his own eyes, he understood. To rid themselves of this, they had to complete the ritual hinted at in the ancient texts from the library. It was the path that past generations had tried to take to tame the monster, but had failed, and so Loch Ness remained a place of curse. "We need to go back to that spot at the bottom of the lake," he said, his voice firm, as if a year older. "And there, among the shipwrecks, is something that will help us end all this. We have to find the ancient stone that is mentioned in the records." "The stone?" Daisy asked. "Yes," James confirmed. "It's a stone that holds the power of the Loch Ness monster. If we destroy it, everything will end. We have to be ready for the fact that, if we destroy it, nothing will ever be the same again." Meanwhile, night descended upon the lake, and the sky darkened, like a red eye watching them from beneath the water. They knew that time was running out, and if they didn't finish this now, they would remain in this place forever, as if their souls were already bound to this curse. And so, they set off again in the boat. Loch Ness had become even more hostile than before. The water was darker, the waves out of rhythm, as if the very depths were fighting against them. The monster didn't surface, but its presence was felt more strongly than ever. They reached the shipwrecks. The water was so murky that even in the dim light, nothing could be distinguished. James, feeling his heart tighten with anxiety, stepped onto the shore, carefully inspecting each stone. He didn't know exactly where the stone was, but he had a feeling that it might be right here. And suddenly he saw it. A large black stone with strange glowing inscriptions, emitting a dead light. The stone was heavy, covered in moss, but its symbols seemed familiar. It was the same as what they had seen in the library. "This is it," James whispered, approaching the stone. Tom and Daisy approached it, ready for anything, but there was no fear in their hearts anymore. They understood. This was the only way to break the cycle. They had to destroy the stone. James lifted the heavy hammer they had with them. He raised it and struck the stone. When the hammer hit the stone, the entire world around them seemed to shudder. The water began to bubble, and a massive wave engulfed them. They fell to their knees, not knowing if they would survive this. But when the wave receded, and they managed to lift their heads, they saw that before them was no longer the lake they had known. It was dark, lifeless, and there was no trace of the monster on the surface. The body of the Loch Ness monster had dissolved into the darkness. They remained standing, staring at the water. Everything became quiet. They couldn't explain what had happened. Everything was gone. The monster, the mystery, the curse. The lake had become ordinary. But was this really the end? Perhaps they had just broken one cycle and entered another. Yet, they still knew that they could never be the same as they were before. Loch Ness had changed them forever. And as they left the shore, somewhere deep beneath the water, something waited for its next seekers. And so, as darkness once again envelopes you, we say goodbye, but not for long. Remember, the night is never truly safe. Subscribe so you don't miss the new horrors, and come back when it's time for new nightmares. Beware of the shadows. They are always near. Until next time.